Chapter 60. Elven Swords. With the palantir fixed on the cave, there was no need to wander. Dewey led the company straight to the troll cave entrance. The place smelled as foul as the stories said. They stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim, and found a pile of coins and trinkets buried in the furthest recesses. Dewey barely glanced at the gold. He had come for something else. He brushed aside cobwebs and dust in a shadowed corner and soon uncovered 3 swords, 2 long blades and a shorter one. The long swords lay in ornate scabbards, ivory finely carved, set with large gems in their hilts. The short blades slept in a plain leather sheath. Despite the grime around them, the metal bore no rust. Even the leather looked remarkably fresh, as if preserved by some craft beyond ordinary keeping. "Is this elven magic?" Dewey murmured. Gandalf, who had noticed Dewey's activity, came over with the others trailing behind. "What have you found, Dewey?" Dewey smiled and held the swords out. 3 blades. They look special. "May I?" Gandalf asked, eager. Dewey handed him one of the long swords. Gandalf examined the scabbard, ivory elaborately worked, and drew the blade. It flashed with a cold, bright light even in the cave's gloom. He ran a gloved hand along the fuller, read the faint inscription, and his face lit with recognition. "Glamdring," he said softly. "Sindarin, faux hammer, an elven sword, and an old one." He lingered over it as if reacquainting himself. He then took the second long sword. It was slender and slightly curved, keen as a razor. A different Sindarin name marked the blade. Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver. He turned the hilt in his hands. "Its pommel? Is that a dragon's tooth?" Gandalf's surprise deepened. "A dragon's tooth set in a sword. If true, it means a dragon fell and the elves made use of what came from it. Remarkable." Faces around him tightened at the thought. The company was bound for the Lonely Mountain, where dragons were no idle tale. Finally, Gandalf picked up the short sword. There were no inscriptions to identify it, only evidence of fine elven workmanship. Dew watched Gandalf's gaze dwell on Glamdring, and a quiet smile crossed his face. Without ceremony, he said, "Gandalf, that first sword seems meant for you." Gandalf's eyes widened, then softened. He accepted the blade solemnly. "I owe you a debt, Dewey." Dewey waved the notion away. After fighting side by side with Gandalf against the trolls, their friendship had grown. He returned the sword because it rightly belonged with Gandalf, not from expectation of reward. Then Dewey turned to Bill and held out the short sword. "This one suits you better. Keep it." Bill balked, flustered. "Duir, you already gave me a dagger. I don't need." "It's not the same," Dewey said. "That dagger was serviceable, but this is elven forged. Keep it for your own safety." The dwarves watched, some with obvious envy, as Bill hesitated and then accepted. He fastened the short sword to his belt beside the dagger, gratitude plain on his face. "Thank you, Duir." Dewey kept the remaining blade, Orcrist, and sheathed it. He had no intention of continuing as a dispenser of fortune. Gandalf and Bill were friends he considered family. The dwarves, however, had long had a transactional relationship with him. He already carried his own flame sword and was not inclined to part with another treasure so easily. Thorin's eyes had been fixed on Orcrist. The dragon-tooth pommel called to him, a sign that seemed to promise luck against the very dragon they would soon face. He stepped forward, trying to measure his tone. "Duir, would you trade Orcrist to me?" Dewey regarded him. He had no pressing need for Orcrist, so he might be persuaded if the terms pleased him. "What do you offer?" Thorin paused, then said, "If I reclaim the Lonely Mountain, I will give you 1% of its treasure." Dewey shook his head. "I do not need more gold." He already had a contract entitling him to 1/10 of the mountain's hoard, together with the spoils from the barrows and the troll cave. Another % would mean little to him. Thorin frowned. He had offered what he thought reasonable. "Then what would you have?" Dewey considered, then looked Thorin squarely in the eye. "When the mountain is yours and you are king under the mountain, build a castle for me on Weathertop, centered on the Tower of Amonsul. I will provide the plans. You will supply the work and the craftsmen." He had renamed the tower Hogwarts and wanted the name to mean something. Dewey admired dwarven craft. They were unrivaled builders, and if an astonishing castle were to be raised in this world, they would make it so. The demand was grand, an immense undertaking in manpower and resources, but in Thorin's mind, the promise of kingship made such things possible. Thorin's brows drew together as he weighed the scale of the task. The request was formidable. but after a long, reluctant breath, he nodded. When the mountain is ours, I will see it done. So Orcrist passed into Thorin Oakenshield's hands once more, as if destiny had guided it back to him. The 3 elven blades from the troll cave were distributed, Glamdring to Gandalf, Orcrist to Thorin, and the short elven sword to Bill. The rest of the troll's treasure was divided equally among the 16 of them. Chapter 61. The Brown-Robed Wizard. After leaving the troll's cave, Dewey used the Palantir again to search for other lairs. He and Gandalf soon found that the nearby caves had already been cleared, the remaining dens were far away, and there were no more prisoners to rescue. After some discussion, they chose not to follow the trolls further. Instead, they decided to head to Rivendell. Thorin, though inwardly impatient to reach the lonely mountain and reclaim the Arkenstone, could not reasonably object when Gandalf and Dewey agreed to act as escorts. Everyone packed up and left the troll forest, continuing east toward Rivendell. Word of the trolls' grisly deaths spread fast. Rumors grew more elaborate with every telling. A monster that hunted trolls had appeared in the forest, eating their hearts and breathing fire. Terrified, many trolls fled into deep caves and dared not come down the mountain. As a result, attacks near the forest declined, and travelers felt safer. Some of the villagers Dewey and Gandalf had freed took boats downriver from the last great bridge to human settlements in the south. Others crossed the bridge and followed the east-west road westward. Tales of the Grey Wizard and the Black-Robed Wizard who slew trolls traveled with them, and soon the two had become known around Eriador as the Troll Slayers. Not long after they left the forest, a commotion rose in the distance, and everyone went on guard. The sounds resolved into something stranger than a battle cry. A wooden sled drawn by rabbits came bounding through the trees. Radagast, the brown-robed wizard, tumbled to a stop before them, his broad brown hat streaked with bird droppings, his robe a muddied, leafy mess. He looked as disheveled as ever. "Radagast," Gandalf exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" "I was looking for you, Gandalf," Radagast panted, clearly shaken. "Something's very wrong." Gandalf looked at him with concern. "What is it?" "Mirkwood is sick," Radagast said. "Darkness is creeping over it. Trees are withering, the air reeks, the rivers run foul. Giant spiders have multiplied, offspring of Ungoliant, I think. I followed their tracks to Dol Guldur and found signs of the necromancer, and I found this." He drew from his cloak a leather-wrapped object and handed it to Gandalf. Gandalf unwrapped the leather. Beneath lay a black, ancient blade that seemed to drink the light around it, a Morgul blade. His face went grave. "The Witch King of Angmar," he said quietly. Dewey and Gandalf exchanged a look. Gandalf's encounter with the Barrow-wights had already warned him the Witch King had not been finished for good. Now, a Morgul blade turned up near Dol Guldur. The presence of a necromancer there could mean only one dreadful thing. The matter had suddenly gone from worrying to urgent. Before they could debate it further, wolves began to howl. "Wolves?" Bilbo blinked. The dwarves answered with tense alarm. "Those aren't ordinary wolves, wargs." A great wolf leapt from the trees, teeth bared, aimed straight at the company. Dewey struck first. A spell from him froze the beast solid at mid-leap. It crashed, shattered, and the flame sword drove through the fallen carcass. Another warg sprang out and was felled by a single blow from Gandalf's newly acquired foe hammer. "Warg scouts," Gandalf said, his voice hard. "Where there are scouts, an army of orcs follows." Panic spread. The horses had been spooked and stampeded. "They're all gone," Dory announced. Only Dewey's small pony, Little Dummy, stayed put, dumbly as his name implied, with the carriage still hitched. There was no way one cart could carry them all to safety. Radagast looked at the group with wild resolve. "I'll draw them off. You slip away while they're after me." "Radagast, those are Gundabad wargs. Are you sure?" Gandalf asked. He looked to Dewey. "We can't risk you alone against them." Radagast's face brightened oddly. "I have the Rosgobel rabbits," he said. "They'll run circles around them. Let them chase me." "I'll take a portion of the enemy as well," Dewey said, stepping forward. "I'll drive the carriage alone. If we split their attention, the rest can escape more easily." Gandalf hesitated. "Who is this?" Radagast asked, looking Dewey up and down. "This is Dewey, Duir, the black-robed wizard," Gandalf replied, then turned back to Dewey with concern. "Are you certain you want to do this? Gundabad wargs and an orc host are not the same as the scattered orcs we met on the wilds. Dewey smiled with quiet confidence. Gandalf, I can take care of myself. Draw them away, then run for Rivendell. Once you cross the ford of Brunnen and enter Elven lands, you will be safe. Chapter 62, Elrond. Just as the wargs and orcs closed in on the expedition from all sides, the brown wizard Radagast burst out of the forest on his rabbit sled. He taunted the attackers and then streaked away into the trees. Immediately afterward, another carriage shot out from the undergrowth. Dewey cast a quick spell and felled 2 wargs that blocked the road, then steered the carriage off at pace. To everyone's surprise, the little pony harnessed to the carriage seemed to carry no weight at all. It pulled the light vehicle as if it were nothing and thundered forward with startling speed. Seeing the 2 groups split off, the orcs and wargs divided their forces and pursued along both lines of flight. Radagast, relying on the unearthly swiftness of his Rosgobel rabbits and his uncanny skill with the sled, ran the mountains and forests like level ground, narrowly outmaneuvering the wargs. Dewey's situation was less fortunate. Although his pony was quick, it could not quite outrun the wargs. Time and again they closed, and each time he had to cast a spell to throw them back, creating a gap. Soon they would catch up again, and he would cast another, knock down another group, until, gradually, the number of pursuing wargs and orcs dwindled. Wargs are cunning and intelligent. They serve orcs as companions rather than as simple beasts of burden. When they saw they could gain nothing by continuing the chase of Dewey, they ignored the orcs' curses and abandoned him to go after the other party instead. Dewey had intended to draw the enemy away, but when the wargs ceased to pursue him, he wasn't about to let them off. He swung the carriage around and gave chase. "Petrificus totalis!" Dewey cried. A spell flew from his hand and stiffened the nearest warg. The beast froze solid. The orc, astride, it was thrown free by his own momentum. Before Dewey could act on the orc, an arrow whistled from the distance and pierced the creature's skull. "Who stole my kill?" Dewey muttered, looking toward the sound of the arrow. A clear, far horn answered him. The ground thrummed, hooves thundered, and a silver host swept over the plain. Elven cavalry, arrayed in elegant armor, tall and lithe riders on swift steeds. Each arrow they loosed found its mark. Each sword stroke fell with the precision of a master's craft. The orcs and wargs, no match for such disciplined, deadly riders, broke and fled. Once the enemy had scattered, the elves halted and methodically finished off those that remained. A squad of elves rode up to where Dewey sat. Their leader dismounted from a tall white horse. He wore ornate armor beneath a midnight blue war robes. His dark hair flowed to his shoulders and was bound with a silver circlet. Though ageless in appearance, his gray eyes held a depth and reserve that spoke of long memory and much seeing, a noble presence that commanded respect. "Greetings, traveler. May I know your name?" he asked. "Duir," Dewey replied. "A wizard from the west." "Black-robed Duir, friend of the halflings, feller of the horns, bane of the Barrow-wights. Your name travels even among the elves," the leader said, curiosity and a touch of appraisal in his voice. "And now I suppose we must add, foe of the orcs. I feel a strange aura upon you," the elf went on, his gaze sharp as though it would read the marrow of things. "Have you been to the troll forest?" "Trolls attacked several nearby villages," Dewey explained. "Gandalf and I went to the troll forest to rescue the people. We slew a few of them." "A noble thing," the elf said approvingly. "So Gandalf was with you?" "We traveled together, though I drew off the orcs and wargs just now, and we lost each other." At the mention of Gandalf, the elf's manner warmed. "If you are Gandalf's friend, stay with us," he said simply. They rode together in silence. Dewey, used to the boisterous companionship of dwarves, found the elves' reserve a little disquieting, so different from the constant grating chatter of his kin. But there was a reason for their quiet. The path the elves led him along wound steep and secret through a canyon that revealed Rivendell at last. When Dewey stepped into the valley, his breath caught. It felt like stepping into a long-forgotten dream. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion. White gravel paths meandered among terraces and gardens. Elegant, pale buildings clung to the riverbanks and rose from the slopes, palaces and towers, bridges and quiet patios, all arranged with a harmony as if the valley had been laid out by music. An almost tangible power suffused the place. spring-like, perpetual, peaceful. Dewey sensed at once that such a safeguarded grace could only be the work of Elrond, keeper of Villia, the Ring of Air. Not long after Dewey and Radagast had drawn the orcs away, Gandalf had led Bilbo and the dwarves through a hidden passage and into Rivendell as well. They had just crossed a narrow stone bridge when an elf descended the steps to meet them. "Mithrandir," the elf said. "Lindir," Gandalf answered with a warm smile. "It has been too long. Where's Lord Elrond? I need to speak with him." "Lord Elrond is not here." "Not here," Gandalf echoed in surprise. Before Lindir could answer, a horn sounded outside and the elven cavalry rode in along the bridge. The sight of mounted, battle-ready elves put the dwarves on edge at once. "Alert!" Thorin barked. "Weapons ready! Tighten formation!" Swords were drawn, and the dwarves fell into a tight back-to-back circle with Bilbo shoved hurriedly to the center. The elven riders did not dismount. Instead, they rode slowly in rings around the encircled dwarves as if teasing them. "Duir! I see Duir!" Bilbo cried, his face lighting up. He squirmed out of the dwarves to peer toward the carriage that rode behind the elves. The leading dark-haired elf greeted Gandalf with a bow. "Mithrandir." "Lord Elrond," Gandalf replied, lowering his own head. Elrond dismounted and handed his sword to Lindir. "We have been hunting a band of orcs who crossed the Bruinen and trespassed into our lands," he said gravely. "It is odd they were so near. Something or someone must have drawn them." He cast a long, appraising look at the wary dwarves, then his tone softened. "By the way, while we were out hunting, we met one of your companions and invited him to join us." He nodded toward Dewey, standing modestly by the carriage. Chapter 63, The Origin of the Sting Sword. Duir stepped down from the carriage, and an elf at once came forward to tend his horse and harness. After thanking him, Duir walked up with a smile and greeted Gandalf. "Gandalf." "Good to see you, Duir," Gandalf said warmly. "I hear you've already met Lord Elrond, so I needn't make introductions." Elrond inclined his head, approval in his gaze. "Wizard Duir's skill in magic is remarkable. When we were hunting orcs, he routed hundreds of orcs and wargs. I think it will not be long before the name Foe of Orcs is known throughout Eriador." "You flatter me, Lord Elrond," Duir protested quickly. There were many who had killed more orcs than he had. He would not claim so grand a title. Elrond's praise shifted to Thorin, and he spoke to the dwarf with courteous formality. "Welcome, Thorin, son of Thrain." Thorin's tone was guarded. "We have never met." Elrond smiled. "I knew Thror when he was king under the mountain." He said it amiably, but Thorin's face hardened. "Really? He never mentioned you," Thorin replied, the barb unmistakable. Gandalf rolled his eyes. Duir could only look away awkwardly. Thorin had a knack for making enemies. Elrond, unruffled, turned to an elf and gave directions in the white tongue. "Light the fires and prepare the wine. We must honor our guests." "What did he say? Is he mocking us?" Gloin bristled, taking a step forward. The other dwarves tensed. "No, Master Gloin, he's inviting you to a feast," Gandalf translated warily. The dwarves murmured among themselves, suspicious of every courtesy. At last Gloin, with all the dignity he could muster, declared, "Then lead the way." At the feast, Elrond, Gandalf, Duir, and Thorin sat together at one table, while the rest of the dwarves and Bilbo took another. Duir eyed the elvish spread, a sea of green, little meat in sight, and glanced at the dwarves across from him who looked as if they might gnaw on the table. The elves, it seemed, had not quite forgiven the dwarves' past offenses. A quiet retaliation lay in the menu, and Duir found himself caught in the middle. At Duir's table, the mood was relaxed except for Thorin's sullen silence. At Bilbo's table, things were rowdier. Keely, the youngest dwarf, had been ogling the elf playing the harp and even winked at him. When the others noticed the player was a man, they burst into laughter, which carried across the hall and drew the attention of Elrond and the rest. Halfway through the meal, Gandalf told Elrond about the troll they had pursued and laid Glamdring on the table, asking if Elrond could tell its origin. Elrond examined the sword and immediately recognized it. "This is Glamdring, the foe hammer," he said. "It was the sword of King Turgon of Gondolin, forged in the First Age for the wars against the orcs." "I didn't expect you to know it," Gandalf said. "Lucky find indeed." "It was not luck," Gandalf added, smiling brightly at Duir. "Duir found it and gave it to me." Elrond looked at Duir with surprise and warmth. "A noble gift," he said. a precious friendship. Duir flushed, embarrassed by the praise and the attention. Elrond then turned his gaze to Thorin's blade and named that one as well, Orcrist, wishing it well. Seeing this, Bilbo, feeling a little left out, hesitantly picked up his short sword. Balin snorted beside him. "Don't be ridiculous," Balin scoffed. "A sword only gets a name after great deeds. That thing of yours? At best, it's a letter opener." Bilbo's shoulders slackened, and he put Sting away, a little crestfallen. Duir, though, had noticed and leaned across. "Bilbo," he said, "why not bring your elvish blade to Lord Elrond? He might know where it came from." Bilbo hesitated. Compared to the jewel-hilted Glamdring and Orcrist, Sting was plain and unadorned. Still, when Elrond looked up with interest at Duir's suggestion, Bilbo felt obliged to comply. "Since there is another elvish blade present, may I see it?" Elrond asked. All eyes turned to Bilbo. He rose with some reluctance and set Sting in front of Elrond. The elf lord slid the short blade from its leather sheath and examined it carefully. A moment later, surprise crossed his face. "Lord Elrond, do you know this sword?" Gandalf asked. Elrond's expression grew grave and thoughtful. "This blade, or rather this dagger, has an extraordinary history. It once belonged to Glorfindel, the lord of the House of the Golden Flower of Gondolin." A ripple of astonishment ran around the hall. "You mean the dagger that slew a Balrog?" Gandalf exclaimed. Elrond nodded, and as the others leaned in, began to tell the tale. Glorfindel had been a noble of the Noldor, the head of a great house in Gondolin. In the year 510 of the First Age, Morgoth's forces besieged the hidden city. A great host, orcs, wolves, balrogs, and even dragons, fell upon Gondolin. The city was betrayed and routed. Only a few escaped. In the pass named the Crisagrim, the fleeing group was ambushed. A Balrog stood in their path. Glorfindel fought the Balrog alone, buying time for the others to flee. In the terrible struggle, he was struck by the Balrog's fiery whip and hurled down a cliff. As he fell, he drove his dagger into the Balrog's belly, and the monstrous spirit was slain. Glorfindel himself perished upon the rocks. "And this," Elrond said, holding the blade so all could see, "is the dagger that felled it." Every face changed. The short, plain blade in Bilbo's hand suddenly seemed charged with ancient consequence. Duir, too, was astonished. He had never guessed that Bilbo's sting carried such a provenance. But the story did not end there. Elrond finished his account gently. Glorfindel had indeed died that day, but the Valar saw fit to grant him grace. He was reborn, and his spirit returned to Middle-earth. Like the Istari in later days, he was sent back to aid the peoples of the West, working alongside Gil-galad, Elrond, and others to oppose the growing shadow of Sauron. Glorfindel, therefore, still lived in Rivendell. A curious situation had arisen. The dagger's original owner, Glorfindel, and its current carrier, Bilbo, were both present in Rivendell. Should the blade be returned to its first master, or remain with the hobbit who now held it? Elrond stroked his beard, troubled by the question. "In that case," he said finally, "we should ask Glorfindel himself what he thinks." Chapter 64, The Book of Spells. Glorfindel stood tall and slender, his face handsome beneath a mane of radiant golden hair. His eyes were bright and keen, his voice like music, and his brow carried the quiet weight of wisdom. He moved with the noble ease of a learned elven sage more than a battle-hardened warrior. As a high elf born in the age of the two trees and bathed in their light, he seemed to glow with a holy radiance. Living mostly in seclusion at Rivendell, he rarely received guests, preferring the library or his own halls. So his appearance at the feast, prompted by the news that a long-lost dagger had resurfaced, was a rare honor. "Lord Elrond." He inclined his head toward the master of Rivendell. "Mithrandir, long-time friend." Gandalf returned the greeting with a smile. Glorfindel bowed to both of them, his voice sweet and pleasing. "Glorfindel, my friend," Gandalf replied warmly. Even the dwarves fell silent at the sight of the elf's radiance. His presence drew admiration from everyone, Dewey included. Though seldom mentioned in the tales, Glorfindel had died gloriously in the First Age and been reborn. His powers now rivaled those of a Maya, and he was considered one of the strongest elves in Middle-earth. Had he been permitted to wield that power freely, like Gandalf and the other Maiar had been to aid the Free Peoples, Sauron might not have endured so long. After exchanging pleasantries, Glorfindel's eyes fell on Bilbo and the dagger he held. "May I see it?" Of course." Bilbo, a little awkward, handed the dagger over. Glorfindel took it, and for a moment his face was full of memory and sorrow. "I once thought it had fallen with the Balrog," he murmured. "I never imagined I would see it again." Bilbo looked uneasy, expecting the dagger to be reclaimed, but instead a smile warmed Glorfindel's features. To everyone's surprise, he returned the blade. "I have been without this knife for countless years. That you found it means it has become yours by fate. May it serve you well." "Thank you," Bilbo breathed with relief. The dagger had been a gift from Dewey. He had wanted to keep it. Glorfindel stayed only briefly after seeing his old weapon. He made a gracious farewell and departed, leaving Bilbo the center of attention as the holder of a blade once used to slay a Balrog and carried by the famed Lord of the Golden Flower. Envy and curiosity buzzed around him. Dewey smiled at Bilbo's good fortune, but he felt an even greater rush of satisfaction when his system finally reacted. Hogwarts Sign-in System. Location, Rivendell. "Would you like to sign in?" "Sign in," Dewey thought without changing his expression. "Sign-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the first edition of the Book of Spells." A thick spellbook materialized before his eyes, visible only to him. The Book of Spells was an earlier work by Miranda Goshawk, the author whose later Standard Book of Spells became the Charms textbook at Hogwarts. In many ways, this volume was the predecessor, an encyclopedia that recorded most of the spells known to the magical world. It included not only common charms and useful spells, but also a portion of the curses, material the Ministry of Magic had deemed too dangerous for general publication. When the book first appeared, the Ministry suppressed parts of it. Many of the spells were considered hazardous or unsuitable, so at the Ministry's request, most curses and particularly destructive enchantments were removed. Miranda Goshawk then reworked the book into the Standard Book of Spells series for Hogwarts' 1st through 7th years, and the abridged work was translated into 72 languages worldwide. For Dewey, the timing could not have been better. Until now, his repertoire had been largely defensive and practical. He had lacked true offensive power and reliable means to finish a fight quickly. The Book of Spells promised to change that. If he weren't still at the banquet, he would have retreated to a quiet corner and devoured its contents at once. At the feast, the dwarves had lost their decorum after one too many flagons. They took offense at the elves' soothing music, calling it funeral dirges, and Beaufort bounced up onto the table and bellowed a rousing dwarven song. Others joined in, clapping, banging utensils, cheering, and even flinging food at one another. Their boisterous revelry made the surrounding elves exchange embarrassed glances. Elrond, presiding at the head of the table, frowned but kept silent out of courtesy. Gandalf, who had praised the dwarves earlier as noble descendants of Durin, looked a touch mortified, as if wishing he could unknow them. Dewey only wished the banquet would end quickly so he could get to work on his new book and grow stronger. When the feast finally wound down, Gandalf and Elrond withdrew to discuss other matters. The dwarves, thoroughly drunk, stayed on in the hall. Bilbo wanted to tour Rivendell. Dewey found a quiet terrace. He appeared to be relaxing, but his attention was fixed on the Book of Spells. The volume contained spells of all kinds, from basic charms to advanced magic, such as the Patronus charm and the undetectable extension charm. What most excited Dewey, however, were the offensive spells and the excised curses that the Ministry had removed from later editions. Among the offensive spells he read about was the Exploding Bolt, a devastating enchantment that could cause an enchanted object to explode with the force of tens of kilograms of TNT. In the Harry Potter tales, Peter Pettigrew once used such magic to escape pursuit and level a street. There were also powerful evocation spells like the Sandblast, the Shattering Charm, and various arrow-conjuring incantations. The curses ranged from the petty, stinging hexes, nail-growing, bone-stretching, to truly cruel dark arts such as the Gutting Curse and the Extraction Charm. In the wrong hands, these spells could inflict terrible harm. They were precisely why the Ministry had restricted the book. Dewey's first choice, though, was not a curse or a destructive bolt. He decided to master the Patronus Charm. A high form of white magic, its incantation was Expecto Patronum. When performed properly, it summoned a corporeal animal Patronus, capable of driving away dark beings like Dementors and Lethifolds. There were no Dementors in Middle-earth, but the Whites he had fought before, and the Nazgul, were creatures of shadow and malice. White magic opposed such darkness. Dewey believed a true Patronus would make encounters with Whites and Ringwraiths far easier to manage. He settled onto the terrace, the book spread before him, and began to study with the kind of focus that promised long nights yet to come. Chapter 65, The Twin Elves. Duir read the section on the Patronus charm carefully, and once he felt he had a solid grasp of the theory, he tried to cast it. Expecto Patronum, he called, forcing his mind toward happy memories as he flicked his wand. Silver mist spurted from the tip, but it remained a formless cloud. It failed to take shape and quickly blew away as his attention wavered. He wasn't disheartened and tried again. This time, more silver vapor poured forth and pooled into a dazzling glow, like a cocoon of light, as if something were forming within. Still, the image was slow to solidify. Duir withdrew his wand, puzzled. He had summoned every happy memory he could think of, yet the Patronus refused to take full form. Was there something else the charm required besides happy thoughts? Then an insight struck him. The charm's name, Patronus, implied protection. In addition to joyful recollection, the caster needed a resolute will to protect someone. The book's instructions had emphasized happy memories, and Duir had overlooked the other half of the equation. With that understanding, he raised his wand again without hesitation. Expecto Patronum. A stream of bright recollections, from his previous life and this one, surged through his mind. Images of the dangers ahead for himself, Bilbo, and Gandalf rose up, and with them a fierce desire that those he cared for would survive. Silver mist gushed from the wand, engulfing the ground around him in a vast, luminous white. At last, the vapor condensed into a large, silver-white bird that beat its wings and circled him, radiating a warmth that filled the air with hope. "Is this an owl?" Duir murmured, surprised. The Patronus had the rounded face, the wide eyes, and the feathered ear tufts of an owl. When Duir reached out, the incorporeal creature alighted upon his arm, weightless, and nuzzled his cheek, lively and affectionate. "What an exquisite charm," a voice said from behind him. Duir turned and saw two young elves approaching. They were striking and nearly identical, dark-haired twins, one wearing a golden hairband, the other a silver one. Both stared at the translucent owl on Duir's arm with admiration and wonder. "Welcome, traveler. We are the sons of Elrond," said the elf with the golden band. "I am Elrohir." "This is my brother Eladon," added the one with the silver band, bowing with the poise of elves. Twins of Elrond, the rare pair among the elves. Duir had not expected to meet them so soon. He rose and inclined his head in greeting. "Greetings, I am Duir, a wizard from Weathertop." "We have heard of you, black-robed Duir," Elrohir said with a small smile. "Your deeds have spread through the wilds. The Huorn Feller, the bane of the Gajong corpse demon, the slayer of trolls, the foe of many orcs, and the one who made Amansul reappear on Weathertop overnight after it was destroyed. Such things are known even among us elves." Duir smiled modestly. "Those tales are exaggerated." "Don't be modest," Elrohir protested, his piercing blue eyes weighing him. "I can tell your deeds are not false. They merit praise." If Elrohir sensed the truth so keenly, Duir thought it suited him well. Eladon, meanwhile, had been examining the wand in Duir's hand with intense curiosity. "Wizard Duir, the wand you carry is unlike the staffs I have seen our kind and other wizards use. May I?" "This is a wand," Duir explained. "It differs from the staffs Gandalf and others bear." Duir was curious, too. He had long wondered whether elves could use such instruments. Elves were a magical people, but their magic usually manifested in crafting enchanted objects, the Silmarils, the 3 elven rings, fine elven blades, and in feats of craftsmanship and lore. Apart from great beings like Elrond and Galadriel, who had cultivated formidable power and deep magical understanding over long ages, most elves did not typically cast spells in the way wizards did. They preferred bows and blades, and their magic often showed itself in heightened perception and a profound attunement to nature. Still, Duir decided to indulge their curiosity. He handed the wand to Eladon and taught him a simple spell, Lumos. Eladon waved the wand and said the words softly. At the tip, a pale white light began to shimmer. The 3 of them stared. The faint glow seemed small and yet somehow wondrous. "I did it!" Eladon cried, exhilarated. For young elves with less experience in the deeper mysteries, producing that light with a wand felt extraordinary. Elrohir tried next, and also succeeded in coaxing a light from the wand. "What a marvelous feeling," he said. "It's just a pity the wand seems to resist us a little," Elrohir added as he returned it reluctantly. "It does not yield fully to our kind." Duir was equally surprised. He had not expected the twins to produce any effect at all. That they could, even if the wand resisted them, suggested that if elves had their own wands, they might be capable of casting spells. For a moment, Duir pictured an army of elves on the field, each raising a wand and chanting spells like Expelliarmus and Petrificus Totalis, sweeping aside ranks of orcs. He shook his head quickly. The image felt oddly out of place, and the thought of such a clash with Middle-earth's tone made him smile and set it aside. Farther off, on another terrace, Gandalf and Elrond had watched the whole scene unfold. Gandalf chuckled. "Well, Lord Elrond, has my companion provided you with any surprises?" "It is a great surprise," Elrond admitted, breathing in as he fixed his gaze on Duir. "I think I must have a proper conversation with this young wizard." Chapter 66. Making Wands for the Elves. Duir had been invited to Rivendell by Lindir, Elrond's steward, and arrived with Elrohir and Eladon at the House of Elrond. Gandalf was there as well. As the two elven brothers stepped forward and bowed, "Father," Elrond returned the greeting, his eyes soft with affection. He and Celebrian had 3 children, twin sons and a daughter. Celebrian had been ambushed and taken by orcs in the Redhorn Pass while traveling to Lothlorien to visit her parents. Though the twins had plunged into the orc warrens of the Misty Mountains and rescued her, her spirit was grievously broken. She had sailed west to Valinor in the hope of healing. Their daughter Arwen had been raised for a time by Celeborn and Galadriel in Lothlorien, and only the twins remained at Elrond's side. "Lord Elrond, what would you have of me?" Duir asked after their greetings. "Wizard Duir," Elrond said, "may I see your wand?" Duir exchanged a quick glance with Gandalf, who smiled and gave a small nod. He took his wand from his belt and handed it over. Elrond turned it carefully in his hand, his brow lifting with interest. "What an extraordinary device," he murmured. "You have combined living, magic wood with other enchanted substances, simple in concept, but the results are subtle and precise. If I am not mistaken," he continued, "this shaft is made from a horn willow, and the core, a strand of Goldberry's hair and a strand of Tom Bombadil's beard," Duir supplied. Elrond's surprise grew into delight. He lifted the wand and in a single graceful movement traced a line through the air. Outside the windows, the distant waterfall was caught in a breeze, condensed into a towering horse of water that thundered through the hall, brought a cool spray and a rush of wind, and then leapt outward again to plunge down into the river valley below. "Excellent," Elrond said, smiling. "It does not vastly amplify power, but it is a fine channeling tool. Even young elves could cast admirable spells with such a wand." He returned it to Duir. "Would you be willing to make wands for us?" Duir blinked at the request. "Of course, if we agree on terms." He glanced at Gandalf, who showed no surprise and no objection. "It's not that I refuse," Duir added. "Making wands is time-consuming, and I am currently on an expedition with companions. I don't have much spare time." He was not trying to shirk the task. He had yet to finish his promise to Gandalf. Gandalf's vinewood staff had been carved, but its magical core had not been found. Duir had tried a troll's nerve once when in the troll forest, but it fit poorly for Gandalf, and he had abandoned the attempt. Elrond waved a placid hand. "Time matters little to us. We can wait for you. Years, decades, even centuries, if need be." Duir's mouth formed a quick laugh. He had almost forgotten that these were immortal folk. "It won't take that long. Once this mission is done, I can make wands for Rivendell." "And how many will you make?" Elrond asked. "The process is delicate. If there are too many, it will be difficult." "You need only make wands for my 2 sons," Elrond answered. Relief relaxed Duir's shoulders. "Very well," Duir said. "That I can do." "One thing," Elrond added. "You will need to procure the magical wood and the other materials yourself. I will be the one commissioning the work." Elrond's expression changed to something more formal, and he enclosed his hands. "Wizard Duir, you have done us a service. What would you ask in return?" Before Duir could answer, Gandalf gave him a conspiratorial wink. cleared his throat and spoke up. Lord Elrond, Duir would like a staff for himself, but the appropriate magic gem has yet to be found. Might you know of any? Duir felt his face warm. He had not intended to have Gandalf press for such a thing on his behalf. Magic gems were rare and precious. Even if he made 100 wands for Rivendell, a single true magic gem would be worth far more. He worried Elrond might take offense at the boldness of the request. Elrond shook his head. Rivendell is not a place that keeps hoards of jewels, I'm afraid, but Lady Galadriel of Lothlorien does possess several precious gems in her collection. I will write to her and speak on your behalf. Whether she would part with one is another matter. He looked then at Gandalf. With your friendship with Lady Galadriel, there is a fair chance you might obtain such a stone. Gandalf inclined his head in assent. Their conversation shifted naturally to other affairs. Though Thorin and the dwarves had been careful to conceal the true aim of their expedition, such things could not be hidden from Elrond, who had lived through many ages. Gandalf had no intention of keeping secrets from him, and so he had had Thorin brought in with the map in his possession, hoping Elrond could read and decipher it. This is no concern of the elves, Thorin said stiffly even now, his pride and suspicion plain. He bristled at the idea of showing the map. My word, Thorin, do not shelter behind dwarven stubbornness, Gandalf snapped. Show the map to Lord Elrond. It is an heirloom of my house, Thorin replied, his voice tight. It is my duty to guard its secrets. Don't mistake caution for wisdom, Gandalf shot back. Your pride may yet be your undoing. The one before you is among the few in Middle-earth who can read that map. Show it. For a long heartbeat, the two kept to their rigid positions, chests set and wills unbent. Duir and Elrond were quiet observers, watching the clash of pride and counsel. At last, Thorin's shoulders sank, and he exhaled. He withdrew the map from his coat and handed it to Elrond. The Lord of Rivendell did not look at Thorin with reproach. He accepted the parchment and began to study it with that patient, age-long attention that had read many faded scripts and traced many lost roads. Elrond's eyes, trained by ages of lore, needed only a moment to read the map. The script was moon letters, the secret rune script of the dwarves, and Elrond knew how they worked. Moon letters only show themselves by moonlight, he said. They must also fit the moon's phase and the season. They are true only when the moon that reveals them is the same as the moon under which they were written. He looked at the map again. These were written on Midsummer's Eve, beneath a new crescent, nearly 200 years ago. Your coming to Rivendell now is not without purpose, Elrond added, turning to Thorin. Fate favors you, Thorin Oakenshield. Tonight the same moonlight falls. He led them to a small crystal platform and laid the map upon it. When moonlight struck the crystal, the runes flamed into sight. The moon letters read, Stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun at the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. Thorin read the words with a frown that erased what little hauteur remained on his face. The instruction was plain. They must reach the lonely mountain on Durin's day and wait until the last light fell on the keyhole. Then, with the key, the secret door would be revealed. The knowledge only made him more impatient. He wanted to leave at once and be on the mountain before Durin's day. Gandalf, however, had other plans. He had summoned the White Council. News of the Witch King of Angmar and of the necromancer at Dol Guldur troubled him, and he would not delay the council's meeting. Thorin bristled. He cared little for politics in the north and cared only for reclaiming the mountain. He muttered about abandoning Gandalf and leading his company out of Rivendell. Duir, called Dewey by those close to him, had spent the past days wandering Rivendell at the side of Elrohir and Eladon. The two elven brothers took him through gardens, libraries, and forges and introduced him to the household's ways. They even showed him a boy who sat quietly in the shadows and listened as if every tale were a treasure. The boy's name, as Elrond had chosen it, was Estel, Hope, though men would later call him Aragorn. He was only 10 years old then, and already Duai felt a curious kinship between him and those two brothers. He could not help thinking of Arwen far away in Lothlorien, and wondering how Elrohir and Eladon would feel if they knew that he, this strange black-robed wanderer, would one day wed their sister and ask her to lay aside the immortality of the elves. Gandalf asked a favor of Dewey as the White Council prepared to assemble. "Come with me," he said. Dewey hesitated. He was not of the council. Why be present at their deliberations? "This meeting needs you," Gandalf replied. "There are matters that must be attested by you as well as by me. Your presence will lend weight." Gandalf's insistence and Dewey's own curiosity won the day. It was not every night one could meet the members of the White Council. On a clear moonlit evening, Gandalf led Dewey through Rivendell to a pavilion high in the gardens. There, standing beneath the silvered leaves and bathed in starlight, was a figure of such presence that the air itself seemed to brighten. She was Galadriel, tall, luminous, robed in white, her hair a pale fall like a cataract of light threaded with silver. She stood with that noble, unhurried grace the elves of the high days possessed. Her eyes were deep and bright, wise, ancient, and piercing as if they could see to the very marrow of a thing. "Mithrandir," she said at sight of Gandalf, and her smile scattered a warmth over the garden. Time had traced itself on them both, but it had left Galadriel unchanged in her majesty. "Lady Galadriel," Gandalf answered, and Dewey saw in his voice the deference he always gave her. The two spoke briefly, old friends picking up the thread after a long separation. Then Galadriel's gaze found him. Dewey felt that look like a soft, searching wind. He bowed quickly, trying to lift his own thoughts from her sight, but Gandalf spoke first. "Lady Galadriel, this is my companion, Duir," he said. "He is a black-robed wizard of rare skill. Even I have seen much of his craft." Dewey stepped forward and saluted. "Lady Galadriel, may the starlight watch over you." Galadriel regarded him with a mild curiosity. Then, without moving her lips, a voice slipped into Dewey's mind, gentle, clear, and intimate as a hand upon his brow. "Young wizard, why do you not look me in the eye?" Dewey's heart stuttered. Telepathy. He had known of it, but to be the subject of it was another thing altogether. He answered swiftly in his mind, choosing flattery because it seemed safest. "I do not dare to linger upon your eyes, lady," he thought. "They shine as the star of Arendelle, and I fear to be blinded." Galadriel's lips curved. "Clever young wizard, you have a glib tongue," she sent, amused. Her gaze held his only a moment longer. Dewey forced his face into an expression of open honesty. "I would be honored to visit Lothlorien when this journey is done," she said aloud to him then. "You are welcome there." To Dewey's astonishment, she stepped forward and with a delicate motion opened her palm. In her hand lay a small gem, green as new leaves and luminous from within. It seemed to hold captured sunlight. "What is this?" Dewey asked, already knowing, for the stone sang its name to one who had some craft to sense such things. "The Elessar," Galadriel answered, "called also the Elfstone. It holds the light of the sun. It may serve as the core of a staff." Dewey's knees nearly softened. The gem was precious beyond most treasures. In his mind, a memory or a story stirred. This was the stone that would one day be given to Aragorn as a sign of his kingship, a token that would be Arwen's dowry. How strange that Galadriel should press it into his hand now. Even Elrond and Gandalf looked surprised. There was an air of things set in motion that none had expected. "Take it," Galadriel said softly. The gem slid warm and settled into Dewey's palm like a living thing. "And yet," she added, and the gentleness of her voice took on an authority that gave weight to any request, "I have a condition." Dewey looked up, relief and apprehension mingling. "What do you ask?" "I would have you make a magic staff for Arwen," she said. Chapter 68, The White Council. What kind of request was this? Dewey was momentarily speechless. A staff for an elf gem. Wasn't that practically giving the thing away? Then, to his surprise, Galadriel gently plucked a strand of her hair and let it fall into his open palm. It was a bright golden lock threaded with silver light, somehow alive with its own glow. "Elrond told me what components are needed for those staves," she said. "Let these be the core for Arwen and her kin." Dewey held the hair as if the stars themselves were in his hand. The tales were true. Even Fëanor had once asked for strands of Galadriel's hair. As an elf who had once walked in the light of the two trees and one of the mightiest of the Eldar, even a few hairs of hers contained uncommon power. This single strand contained 5 separate hairs. 3 could form the cores for the staves of Arwen and her brothers, Elrohir and Elladan. A 4th might be used in an attempt to fashion a staff for Gandalf. The last was a gift, an honor he scarcely felt worthy of, a favor none even Feanor had secured. Dewey plucked a nearby leaf and with a small transfiguration, changed it into a fine silk handkerchief. He wrapped the bright hairs carefully, pressed them to his chest, and bowed his head. "Lady Galadriel," he promised, solemn, "you may trust me. I will craft powerful staves for Princess Arwen and her family." Galadriel smiled at the pledge. For a moment the place thrummed with gentle goodwill, until an unwelcome voice cut through the warmth. "Gandalf, why have you brought an irrelevant guest to such an important meeting? You grow careless." A tall, lean man in white robes appeared not far off, staff in hand, an expression set in sharp, amused disapproval. Gandalf's face fell for an instant, but he forced a polite smile. "Saruman, it's been a long time." He introduced Dewey on his own. "This is my friend, the black-robed wizard Duir. He is no meaningless passerby. I had reason to bring him." Saruman interrupted with a sneer. His cold eyes traveled over Dewey, frank contempt writ plain on his face. "A black-robed wizard? Since when have you consorted with third-rate sorcerers, Gandalf? A few party tricks and you call him a wizard?" Gandalf glanced apologetically at Dewey. Saruman and he had long been at odds. Dewey had been dragged into their rivalry. Dewey did not bother to hide his disdain. He'd already seen Saruman's fate in his mind and did not fear him. He met Saruman's gaze without wavering. "My title of wizard was earned by my deeds, by hunting down the hill ghosts, trolls, and orcs that plague Eriador," Dewey said quietly. "It was given me by the folk of the West. That hardly leaves you fit to judge." Saruman's lips tightened. As head of the White Council and the most eminent of the Istari, he possessed the highest standing among them, something that had only sharpened his sense of superiority and his resentment when Círdan chose to give Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf instead of him. That jealousy had been a slow burn, and Saruman's private ambitions, his curiosity about the making of rings, had only widened the rift between them. Dewey felt none of that subtlety. He simply stood firm, unbowed by Saruman's disdain. "I will not have irrelevant folk here," Saruman said icily. "Leave. This is not your place." "Duir was invited by me," Gandalf replied in a low voice. "He is connected to what I must tell you. He witnessed the Nazgul, and he is a mighty ally." "Saw the Nazgul?" Saruman laughed scornfully. "After the War of Mordor, the Nazgul were gone with Sauron's fall. You claim that you and this third-rate wizard have seen them now?" Gandalf's expression hardened. "Not long ago, passing through the Barrow Downs, we encountered the Witch King of Angmar, riding with a corpse demon." He reached into his cloak and set a thin, cold blade on the table. The metal seemed to drink the light around it. A faint, sickly aura pulsed from its edge. Elrond and Galadriel, who had been listening in silence, went still at the sight. Galadriel's voice was a whisper of recognition. "That is a Morgul blade, made for the Witch King of Angmar. After Angmar fell, the men of the north sealed his body and his possessions deep within the high hills of Rudor, entombed beneath the rock. They should never have seen the light again." Elrond frowned, incredulous. "That tomb was sealed with powerful spells. How could this blade have come out?" Gandalf looked at them both. "The seals might hold, but what if someone can call him back? We all know the hand behind such summoning. If that will is present, they can draw him from wherever he lies." "Nonsense," Saruman snapped. "Sauron was defeated long ago. Without the One Ring, he cannot rise again. The One Ring, lost in the Anduin, perhaps carried out to sea and never found. He cannot return," he added, as if that settled the matter. "But the Witch King is real," Gandalf insisted. "His power remains. Duir saw him on the Barrow Downs. Later we encountered an army of corpse demons along the Great East Road, controlled by him. We cannot be mistaken." Saruman waved a hand. "That is merely your opinion," he said, then looked at Dewey with thin contempt. "And the testimony of a second-rate wizard with no standing? Hardly sufficient proof." Dewey's jaw tightened. He had expected insults. He had endured worse. But he had patience and a small, steady temper. "If Saruman thinks we lack proof," Dewey said calmly, "I can demonstrate that Gandalf's words are true, though I suspect, sir, you will refuse to accept it even if you see it yourself." At that, every pair of eyes turned to him. Even Gandalf looked surprised. Chapter 69, Leaving Rivendell. "You? How can you prove it?" Saruman demanded, eyes hard with suspicion. "I can perform arts that draw out someone's memories." Dewey pressed his wand to his temple. calling up the moment, and murmured the words. A silver filament slipped from his brow, a memory pulled free. To view such a thing, one must either implant it into another mind or place it in a vessel. A pensieve was impractical here, and none of those present would readily allow their minds to be used. Dewey instead turned to Galadriel. "Lady Galadriel," he said, "I have heard you can craft a water mirror that shows past and future. Will you make a vessel that can hold a memory so all may see?" "As you wish." Galadriel did not refuse. She took up a simple wine jug from the table, walked to the fastening of the Rivendell stream, and scooped a measure of water. When she poured it back upon the table, the liquid glittered as if full of starlight, bright and clear. It took on the smooth, luminous surface of a true water mirror. At her signal, Dewey flicked the silver thread from his wand into the bowl. The memory sank into the glassy surface and the water rippled. Images formed like scenes in a pool. They saw Dewey's first encounter with the Witch King of Angmar, a body possessed in the tombs of the Barrow Downs. They saw the company on the road, swarmed by hundreds of wights. They saw Gandalf, blade in hand, fighting a wight which bore the Witch King's presence. One sequence followed another until the story of that day was told in living images. All who stood before the mirror watched in silence. Even Saruman, stubborn and proud, fell quiet. The evidence was there for all to judge. The others, Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf, were people of insight and power. None could mistake what they had seen. It was the Witch King, yet Saruman would not yield. "Even if it is the Witch King," he scoffed at last, "that does not make Sauron returned. When Isildur cut the ring from him with Narsil, his bodily form was broken. His spirit alone is little to fear. Without the One Ring, he cannot reclaim power to menace Middle-earth again." Elrond and Galadriel remained formally silent, but their posture and the small inclinations of their heads showed where their sympathies lay, quietly with Gandalf. Saruman felt the isolation like salt in a wound. He had expected to lead the White Council. Instead, he found himself opposed and without open support. His resentment flared, and shifting ground, he seized on another complaint. "Setting aside the Nazgul," he said, "there is the matter of the dwarves. Gandalf, you meddle where there is no need. We know what slumbers beneath the lonely mountain, yet you urge them to wake the dragon. You invite disaster." "The dragon Smaug belongs to no side," Gandalf answered calmly. "If he fell in with the orcs or the eastern powers, it would threaten every free people. Only by allowing the dwarves to recover the mountain can we hope to check the darkness from the far east." They argued in low, fierce tones, while Lindir, Elrond's attendant, entered with news. Thorin Oakenshield and his company had left Rivendell at dawn, he said. Thorin himself, his dwarves, and Bilbo. Lindir's manner relaxed. The dwarves had been a constant commotion in Rivendell, eating stores, singeing elvish instruments for firewood, splashing in the fountains, and making riotous noise. Elrond, bound by hospitality, had not rebuked them, but the house felt lighter at their departure. There was talk of a feast among the elves. The White Council's meeting broke down in discord. Saruman's opposition had been enough that Elrond and Galadriel would not openly oppose him. The council could not agree to a joint assault on Dol Guldur. Gandalf, frustrated, resolved to go to Dol Guldur himself to learn the truth of Sauron's presence there. Before they left Rivendell, with Elrond's permission, Dewey enchanted a hearth to act as a flue node, linking the fireplace of Rivendell with the hearth in the Weathertop Tower. Henceforth, he could step between Weathertop and Rivendell by the flow. As a token of thanks, he presented Elrond with a small pouch of flue powder, enough for 10 journeys for one person. Travel toward the Lonely Mountain would cross the forbidding Misty Mountains, so Dewey left his carriage and his pony, Little Dull, in Rivendell with the elves for safekeeping. He and Gandalf set off on foot, following Thorin's trail. Thorin and his company had a head start of a day, but Dewey was not worried. He had a palantir to keep watch. "Where are they now?" Gandalf asked, seating himself upon a rock and filling his pipe. "Let me see." Dewey opened a small leather sack at his belt and drew from it a crystal sphere larger than the bag itself. Placing it to his eye, he peered. They're nearing the high pass. We could overtake them, but it will take time." He returned the palantir to the pouch, then produced a water bottle from the expanded interior and drank. Gandalf watched with a smile of astonished envy. Your magic never ceases to surprise me, Gandalf said. You do spatial things we do not. You make room where there seems none. It's the undetectable extension charm, Dewey replied. It doesn't bend space so much as make the inside larger without changing the outside. It's recorded in the Book of Spells. Practically every wizard's trunk or concealment work uses it. Tents, hidden rooms. The most famous example is Newt Scamander's case, which contains almost a world. It's a difficult charm. I worked long to make a steady space, just over 2 meters across, inside a simple leather pouch. It's made travel far easier. Dewey had stowed nearly everything from his carriage into that pocket world: weaponry, cloak, provisions, even the palantir. He walked light, with wand in hand and little more to carry. Gandalf's eyes were bright with envy. If you like, Dewey added, amused, I made a little enlargement to your pipe pouch as well. For Shire tobacco, you now can carry your tobacco wherever you go. Gandalf beamed. Excessive modesty is a kind of pride, Dewey. He shook his head in frank admiration. Your art is not what we teach. We call on the power of nature. Yours seems to come from within, an act of will. Say, let there be light, and light is. That is not something we do. It may be small now, but it has vast possibilities. He fell silent a moment, then added with the familiar, kindly authority of a master craftsman, You have the elven gem Lady Galadriel gave you. It is time to make your own staff. Decide what wood you would choose and tell me. I will make it for you. Chapter 70. Rock Giant Dewey hesitated. He had a large length of willow heartwood suitable for a staff, but willow was only the best he had encountered so far, not the ideal material. Now that he possessed precious magic gems like the elven gem, he wanted a staff made from a tree with truly powerful magic. Willow felt ordinary by comparison. Gandalf, he asked, you've traveled widely. Do you have any suggestions for good staff wood? Gandalf thought for a moment. Among the most magically potent trees of Middle-earth, the Ents and their kin are foremost. The Ents, Yavanna's tree herders, are aligned with the earth's deep powers. Even the Huorns of the Old Forest answer to them. Radagast speaks well with the Ents of Fangorn. Perhaps he could arrange for a branch. Then there are the Malorn trees of Lothlorien. Those trees are folk of a higher making, descendants in spirit of the 2 trees of Valinor. They carry a strong, strange light. Lady Galadriel planted seed brought from the west. That is why Lorien has its golden name. If you wanted Malorn wood for a staff, you would need to ask Galadriel's leave. There is also the white tree, a descendant of the silver tree of the 2 trees. It is rare, a symbol of Numenor and Gondor. One stood in Minas Tirith, though that particular tree has withered. Dewey turned the options over in his mind. Excluding the nearly impossible white tree, both Entwood and Malorn wood were possibilities. Malorn seemed the more attainable. Galadriel had already invited him to Lothlorien and had promised to allow him to craft a wand for Arwen. The Ents of Fangorn, however, had a reputation for being temperamental, and Dewey recalled the Huorns of the Old Forest had not been friendly. He decided to put the decision off until after the expedition to the Lonely Mountain. There was another matter. He had promised Gandalf a wand. The shaft was finished. Only the core remained to be chosen. Galadriel had given him 5 strands of hair, each threaded with magic and the light of the 2 trees. They were perfect as cores. 3 had been given to Elrohir, Eladon, and Arwen. Of the 2 left, one had been tested in Gandalf's staff, but it did not suit him. Like the elven rings they wore, magic had a disposition. Gandalf's essence was of flame, while Galadriel's was of water, and the 2 did not harmonize. So Dewey had tucked the 2 remaining strands into his pocket with a rueful smile. Galadriel's hair bore her blessing. It held power to ward off darkness and to protect the mind. Sauron's most terrible skill was not only destruction but corruption, the turning of minds. The Nazgul had been mortal kings until the 9 rings bound their wills. Even a Maya like Gandalf would not dare touch the One Ring. Dewey knew his own strength and will were no match for that kind of mental erosion. With Galadriel's strands, he would be spared that fate. Guided by the Palantir, Dewey and Gandalf hurried for the high pass of the Misty Mountains. Halfway there, a storm rose. "Protego," Dewey called, and a thin shield of magic wrapped them. Despite the sheets of rain, not a drop touched their cloaks. "Good thing for your spells," Gandalf said with a wry smile. "Thorin and the others will be drenched by now." He peered up into the rumbling clouds, anxiety creasing his face. There are tales of giants in these mountains. I hope they are not about. Dewey handed Gandalf the palantir. Gandalf peered into its depths and his expression grew grave. The globe showed enormous stone figures, rock giants as tall as mountains, hurling boulders at one another. The falling stones sent avalanches down the slopes. In the crevices and clefts, Thorin and the company crawled and cowered like ants, dodging the tumbling rocks. By providence, none had yet been crushed. "We must hurry," Gandalf said. "If they meet the giants, it could be a slaughter." They quickened their pace. Dewey cast spells to lighten their legs. Gandalf's ring of fire lent him endurance. Without pause, they pressed on for hours. When at last they crested the pass, the sight left them stunned. The rock giants rose like mountain spires, their torsos lost in the clouds. Some stood taller than the tower on Weathertop. Their shifting sent thunder through the sky. That was what stirred the storm. Fortunately, rock giants dwelt in solitude and slumber for ages, and generally took no part in Middle-earth's quarrels. If they chose a side, disaster would follow. Now, though, their play had turned the slopes into ruin. Sheets of shattered rock cascaded toward Dewey and Gandalf. They braced their Protego shields and pushed forward through a hail of debris. "They do not mean malice," Gandalf said, the secrecy gone from his tone. "They are careless. Mischief is their nature." He lifted his staff and struck it hard against the ground. Light flared, and his voice went out like thunder. "Quiet now, you foolish brutes. Stop your throwing." The giants paused. They peered down at Gandalf, curious, their vast faces shadowing the pass. "No more games," Gandalf called. "Look what you've done to this place." Dewey looked up at the Titans and then at Gandalf, who stood like a headmaster rebuking boisterous students. For a moment, Dewey felt reassured. Then, without warning, the giants resumed. Hands the size of hills scooped up new boulders and sent them hurtling toward the pass. Gandalf's brow tightened. "They have not understood me," he muttered, and surged into action as the next volley came. Chapter 71, Goblin Town. Confringo. A dazzling burst of magic struck the boulder and shattered it into 1,000 fragments. Dewey stood at the front, watching the rock giant in the distance with wary eyes. He muttered loudly, "Gandalf, your method isn't working." Instead of easing the situation, it drew the attention of every rock giant around. "Things don't always go as planned, do they?" Gandalf said with an innocent shrug. "At least Bilbo and the others are safe, aren't they?" Dewey rolled his eyes. There was no time for joking. Why wasn't Gandalf making more of an effort? "Watch out," Gandalf suddenly shouted. Several rock giants seized massive boulders and hurled them toward Dewey and Gandalf. The stones plummeted like meteors, each impact force capable of smashing mountains and reducing anything beneath them to pulp. Dewey saw them coming, and his expression went tight. He gripped his wand and poured every ounce of magic into it. Protego Maxima. A powerful barrier erupted, forming a thick, globe-like shield that wrapped around both Dewey and Gandalf. Gandalf didn't stand idle either. He drove his staff into the air with both hands. The shockwave shattered the incoming boulders into a hail of rubble, which the barrier then absorbed. For the moment, the two of them had managed to deflect the attack, but it only made the giants angrier. They grabbed more boulders and launched them again. Casting like this was exhausting. Dewey and Gandalf could not keep it up forever. The giants, however, had an inexhaustible supply of missiles. "We can't face them head-on," Gandalf said, his voice grim over the storm of falling stone. "We need to blind their sight, find Thorin and the others, and get out of here." "I know a spell that might work," Dewey called back. "I've never tried it myself, though. I don't know if it'll succeed. Don't hesitate. Try it. I believe in you." Gandalf urged, sending another boulder spinning to fragments with a flick of his staff. Dewey opened the book of spells. He remembered an obscuring spell that produced a heavy mist to hide figures and confuse the enemy. He had a hazy recollection of Dumbledore using it to cover London during his meeting with Newt Scamander. He had only glanced at the spell before. Now he had to learn it on the fly, following the book's instructions. Vaporous Cloud. The spell proved simpler than he'd feared. Thick, rolling mist poured from the tip of his wand and spread outward in a swirling vortex. In moments, the entire high pass was swallowed in dense fog. One could not see their hand in front of their face. The rock giants clawed at the air, bellowing in frustration, but the vapor seemed endless. They could only roar and fling the stones blindly. "Well done, Dewey," Gandalf praised in a low voice. Guided by the Palantir, the two slipped through the fog and threaded their way between the giants, arriving at the spot where Thorin's company had last stood. It was inside a cave, and the chamber looked abandoned, no sign anyone had left recently. Gandalf struck his staff against the stone, and a section of the floor collapsed, revealing a huge dark chute. "Oh no," Gandalf muttered. "This is a trap, set by goblins. Thorin and the others must have been taken." "First, let's see their situation with the Palantir," Dewey said, taking the crystal ball out again. The image inside showed an enormous underground cavern crisscrossed with wooden suspension bridges and ladders. Tens of thousands of goblins filled the place. Goblins, short, dark green creatures who favored the dark of caves and tunnels, were everywhere, skulking, digging, and setting traps. Unlike orcs, goblins are smaller, more cunning, and cruel in their own sly way. The dwarves were surrounded, disarmed, and dragged before the Goblin King. Bilbo, however, had made use of hobbit stealth and slipped away unnoticed. He had avoided being bound and brought forward, at least for now. "Our master thief got lucky this time," Gandalf said. "We must hurry, or the dwarves will become goblin food." Dewey watched the Palantir a moment longer. He saw Bilbo suddenly spotted by a goblin. In the ensuing scuffle, both Bilbo and the goblin tumbled into a deep chasm below the cavern. The fall should have been fatal, yet Bilbo somehow survived with only a few scrapes. The goblin, by contrast, died instantly. Dewey let out a quiet breath of relief, a small, private thankfulness that the hobbit's improbable luck, always nudging them toward the story's center, had held true. Satisfied Bilbo lived, Dewey slipped the Palantir back into its leather pouch and hurried after Gandalf. He couldn't and wouldn't interfere with whatever destiny the One Ring might have in store for Bilbo. Hobbits had an uncanny resistance to many magics. Even the likes of Gandalf and Galadriel did not dare handle the One Ring lightly. Dewey had no desire to tempt fate, no wish to touch something that could twist him into a servant of Sauron or turn him into a wraith. They descended into the mountain. The underground world unfolded into a maze of tunnels, caverns, and narrow passages, dimly lit and bristling with goblin engineering. The main chamber was a vast, cruel bazaar of bridges and ladders where the Goblin King held court. He was not like the other goblins, far larger, with a bulbous head nearly 3 meters high, and he carried a staff topped with a ram's head. His mind was sharp, his malice colder than most of his kin. When the king discovered evidence among the confiscated goods, elven artifacts, and, most damning, Thorin's sword Orcrist, stained with goblin blood, his fury ignited. Orcrist was a blade that had killed many goblins. Seeing it, the king ordered the dwarves slaughtered without mercy. Chapter 72. The Might of the Mandrake. From the shadows, two figures hidden beneath a disillusionment charm watched the chaos unfold. Dewey leaned toward Gandalf. "Gandalf, should we intervene?" Gandalf gave a slight shake of his head. "Wait." The Goblin King, spotting Thorin, snarled with derision at the dwarf lord's ragged state and barked orders for a runner to carry word to Azog. He intended to trade Thorin for the Orc King's reward. But before the messenger could move, Gandalf sprang forward with a roar of power. A single, devastating shockwave ripped through the cavern, overturning fetid rock and sending scores of goblins, king among them, flinging through the air. Gandalf landed between the goblins and the dwarves like a guardian. "Grab your weapons and go," he shouted. Tens of thousands of goblins swarmed within the cave. Gandalf's blow had only scattered a portion of them. As the company fled, cutting through snarling ranks ahead and shaking off attackers from behind, the fallen Goblin King recovered and planted himself directly in their path. He was huge, a hulking mass of muscle and malice, brandishing a club the size of a tree trunk. "Do you think you can run?" he crowed. "Never." Around them, the goblins closed in until every exit was blocked. Despair settled over the dwarves like a chill. Balin looked at Gandalf as if he were their last hope. "What now?" he asked. Gandalf's expression stayed calm, almost amused. "Don't worry. We still have help." Petrificus totalis, a flash of magic, struck the Goblin King from behind. He froze mid-roar, every muscle locked, face pinched with impotent rage. A figure stepped into view behind the giant, Dewey. He drew his flame sword, plunged it into the king's lower back, and unleashed a blast of scorching fire. The great beast convulsed once and fell silent. The surrounding goblins went still for a heartbeat, stunned by the sight of their monarch's sudden death. Then a deadly howl rose from the horde. "He killed the king! Avenge the king!" They surged like a living tide. Protego totalum. A shield blossomed into being, a dome of shimmering magic that pushed the goblins back and sealed the company within. They were safe for the moment, the spell forming a ring that held the attackers at bay. Outside the barrier, goblins snarled and clung to the magical wall in such density that their bodies formed a writhing, unyielding mass. Inside, the dwarves let out a collective breath of relief, but it was short-lived. With the goblins closed in on all sides, the dwarves' hope of escape dwindled. "Dewey, what do we do now?" Thorin wanted to know. "They can't get in, but neither can we get out." Dewey smiled without much mirth. "I have a plan." He unfastened a small leather pouch and drew out a pot. Inside, curled in dark soil, was a mandrake, a humanoid root, pale and misshapen. Since it had matured, Dewey explained, he had kept it bound with Petrificus totalis to silence its lethal cry. But having learned the silencing charm from the Book of Spells, he could finally use it in safety. First, he layered the silencing charm over himself, Gandalf, and every dwarf inside the barrier. Then, with a practiced flick, he lifted the Petrificus off the mandrake and seized it by the root. The creature exploded with motion. It writhed and twisted, ugly limbs straining, and then it opened its mouth. A scream like a blade tore loose, high, piercing, and utterly unnatural. Even through the silencing charm, the sound slipped like ice under a door. Dewey and the others clapped their hands to their ears and flinched. Outside the barrier, the mandrake's cry hit the goblins full force. Those closest dropped dead in an instant, their bodies collapsing where they stood. Those farther away went rigid, then crumpled like puppets whose strings had been cut, tumbling into the yawning chasm below. Bodies thudded and slid. A silence fell over the cavern, as if someone had pressed a finger to the world's throat. When the echo finally died, Dewey swept his wand. The fallen goblins slid into the abyss, as if carried away by a current of magic. Only then did he cast Petrificus totalis on the mandrake, sealing it quiet once more, and slowly withdrew the silencing charm from his companions. "All clear," he said. The dwarves crowded forward, staring at the carnage, and then at the plant in Dewey's hands. Awe and horror warred on their faces. "What is that thing?" Balin breathed. "Its sound. It killed so many." It was like the cry of a woman from beyond, a scream that takes the soul, Feely said, his voice thin. "Even with the charm, I felt my spirit pulled." "You'd be like those goblins if you truly heard it," Balin said dryly, though his eyes were wide. Keely was already buzzing with a mad hope. "Why don't we take it to the Lonely Mountain?" he asked. "Throw it at the dragon. Smash Smaug with its scream." For a moment, Thorin's eyes shone at the idea. No need for the Arkenstone, no need to rally the clans, just the mandrake's scream, and the mountain would be theirs. But Gandalf shook his head slowly. "The mandrake's cry is a soul-affecting magic," he said. "It can be fatal to ordinary creatures. But Smaug is different. Dragons have vast, resilient souls. This cry might wound him, perhaps grievously if it catches him unawares, but it is unlikely to kill him outright." Disappointment washed over the company. Thorin's shoulders dropped. The bright hope was dimmed. "Let's get out of here," he said, voice hollow. "Not yet," Dewey replied. His face grew suddenly serious. "We haven't found Bilbo." There was a ripple of alarm. "Bilbo?" Balin looked around frantically. "Where?" "He's not with us," another dwarf answered. "We haven't seen him since the goblins took us." A chill ran through the group. Gandalf frowned. "Has anyone seen him since the mandrake's cry?" Dewey raised a hand. "Don't worry. Before I let the mandrake cry, I made sure Bilbo wasn't here." "Not here? Where is he then?" Thorin demanded. Dewey pointed toward the yawning chasm. "I saw him fall. He landed near the Palantir at the bottom." Faces relaxed. "He's all right?" Balin demanded. "He's lucky," Dewey said. "Apart from some scrapes, he should be fine." Relief washed through them like warm sunlight. "Wizard Dewey, next time you speak, say everything at once. You gave us a fright." Balin clapped Dewey on the shoulder with a rueful smile. Dewey grinned. "I'll try." Then he produced the crystal ball, the Palantir, and set it on the ground. Everyone gathered around as he concentrated, seeking Bilbo's image. But the view that came back was wrong. The Palantir showed the bottom of the abyss, rock, broken ledges, the Palantir itself, and no sign of Bilbo. Strange, Dewey thought. Where did he go? Chapter 73, How to Raise a Basilisk. What's wrong with it? Is this crystal ball broken? The dwarves crowded around, voices full of bafflement. Gandalf frowned as well and reached out. Duir, may I see it? Duir handed him the Palantir. Gandalf concentrated, attempting to locate Bilbo with the Seeing Stone. Nothing changed. It still showed the same empty view. Bilbo's figure was nowhere to be seen. Is the Palantir really busted? Has it run out of power? He muttered. I told you elvish things look pretty, but aren't as solid as dwarven workmanship, one of the dwarves grumbled. Not made to last. They complained for a moment, but Duir's eyes stayed fixed on the image in the stone, and a realization suddenly struck him. Bilbo had the One Ring. If Bilbo had put it on, he would have become invisible. The Palantir could detect where he was, but not reveal his shape. Only Duir knew this, and he didn't want to announce Bilbo's possession of the ring in front of a room full of dwarves. He kept his puzzled expression, slipped the broken Palantir into his leather pouch, and proposed they search the lower caverns for Bilbo. Before they descended, though, Duir needed to sign in. The system had reacted when they first entered the Goblin Cavern, but it had been too chaotic to acknowledge it. Now he finally had time. The login prompt blinked in his mind. Hogwarts Sign-in System, location, Misty Mountains, Goblin Town. Do you wish to sign in? Duir smiled inwardly and answered, Sign in. Sign in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained the method for cultivating a basilisk. Duir blinked. Basilisk? He hadn't expected that. From stories he knew, the basilisk was one of the most dangerous dark arts creatures. Its gaze was lethally powerful. A direct look meant instant death, and even indirect eye contact could petrify. Its venom was deadly. Aside from phoenix tears, no potion or healing magic could cure it. Basilisks lived for centuries and grew ever larger. Only a parselmouth could control one. Anyone else who tried to breed or tame a basilisk usually ended up dead. Duir had Parseltongue. If he could raise a basilisk, it would be like strapping wings to a tiger. The thought made him uneasy. Parseltongue, breeding a basilisk, all of those were hallmarks of a dark wizard. He hesitated, then shrugged inwardly. Whatever label the wizarding world might give him, if it made him stronger, he'd accept it. A practical man cared for results more than titles. He accepted the instructions. The method itself was disturbingly straightforward. You needed a 7-year-old rooster that, by nature, never laid eggs. Then, on a night when Sirius burned in the sky, you forced the rooster to lay a magic egg through a dark arts ritual that used the star's power as a catalyst. The egg had to be incubated beneath a toad. When it hatched, out would slither an emerald-green basilisk. The sex of the beast was signaled by a single scarlet feather on its head. Present meant male, absent meant female. The ritual intentionally violated natural law and required precise astrological timing and forbidden magic. Middle-earth had its Sirius too, so Duir faced no cosmological barrier. Practically, however, the requirements were awkward. 7-year-old roosters weren't common, and the star's favorable appearance occurred only once a year, on the night Sirius was overhead, which the system dated roughly to midnight on January 1st. It was already June. That meant waiting another 6 months, by which time the quest for the Lonely Mountain would be over. For now, cultivating a basilisk would have to be postponed. With the goblins either dead or unconscious, they posed no threat. Finding Bilbo was urgent, but the opportunity to explore the Goblin Kingdom's treasure hoards was too tempting to ignore. The largest cavern, the Goblin King's Hall, was the likeliest place for hidden spoils. When they entered, the scene matched every rumor and more, a cavern filled edge to edge with gold, silver, gems, and diamonds in a staggering quantity. Only the Lonely Mountain's vaults could rival such a sight. Even Thorin, who had seen his own mountain's hoard, stared in surprise. My word, we're rich! Dwalin's eyes glittered with greed. Don't get carried away, Dwalin, Balin snapped, tapping his bald head. These are Duir's spoils. You lot didn't win them. The dwarves' avarice slowed when they remembered whose feet had saved them from the goblins. They had little claim. Duir himself did not feel greatly moved. He had seen treasure enough to be steady. Generous, he told them to take as much as they could carry. Thorin refused, as ever, but the others happily began shoveling coins and gems into pockets and packs until everything bulged. As they were filling themselves with gold, a flash of silver caught Duir's eye beneath the coins. Curious, he brushed the treasure aside and uncovered an exquisite spear. It was entirely silver white, humming with a cold light. The shaft bore intricate patterns and strange runes. The blade was like a snow-capped peak, gleaming, razor-sharp, as if it could pierce any substance. Duir felt a thrill. He reached out and gripped the spear. The moment his fingers closed around the shaft, his pupils contracted, and a surge of power flowed from him into the weapon. The spear flared with a dazzling, icy light. Its tip shone exposed and seemed to pulse with contained destruction. Without thinking, Duir thrust it into the stone wall of the cavern. The spear sank in as if the rock were soft clay. A violent concussive force burst from the point, and the wall cracked in great, spreading fissures, beginning to crumble. Gandalf, who had been nearby, went pale when he saw the spear. "Duir, may I have it?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Duir handed it over, then asked, "Gandalf, do you recognize this spear?" Chapter 74. The Divine Spear. Eglos Gandalf cradled the spear, running his fingers along its shaft and studying it with obvious reverence. "Duir, your luck is enviable," he said at last. "If I'm not mistaken, this is no ordinary weapon. It's Eglos, Gil-galad's spear. The High King of the Noldor carried it into many battles. It is said to have drawn Sauron's blood during the War of the Last Alliance. After Gil-galad fell, the spear vanished. No one ever expected to find it among the Goblin King's horde," he added. At Gandalf's words, every head turned toward the silver-white spear. Even the dwarves, who rarely spoke kindly of elven deeds, reacted to Gil-galad's name. As the last High King of the Noldor and ruler of Lindon, Gil-galad had led the elves into alliance with Elendil. Together they had marched south, broken Sauron's hosts on the Dagorlad, and laid siege to Barad-dûr. In that final clash, both Gil-galad and Elendil fell. Gil-galad's spear disappeared, and Elendil's sword, Narsil, was broken. Later, Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's hand. Sauron's physical form was destroyed. The story was as familiar to the company as any tale of the First Age. Dewey held the spear carefully, amazed. As a weapon of Gil-galad, it must be the work of master elven smiths, nearly 2 meters long, made of a strange, unyielding material, razor-sharp, yet astonishingly light. He could wield it single-handed. Gandalf watched him with envy. "Use it well," he warned. "This is the only weapon that has touched Sauron's blood and remained whole. It was forged to pierce darkness. It might even go through a dragon's scales. Eglos would be a tremendous asset at the Lonely Mountain." Dewey nodded solemnly. He already had the flame sword, but who would complain about another powerful weapon, especially one said to be indestructible? He had begun to suspect that ordinary magic might be ineffective against truly ancient, mighty beings. Maya like Balrogs or dragons such as Smaug might shrug off spells that worked well against orcs. Killing curses which prey upon the soul might not be enough against creatures with tremendous resilient spirits. He remembered Barty Crouch Jr.'s boast that a death curse from a student would barely make him bleed. The thought made him cautious. A native artifact like Eglos, charged with ancient power, could inflict damage no mundane spell could accomplish. He slid Eglos into his leather satchel's extra-dimensional space and turned to the rest of the treasure filling the cave. He was no longer in need of riches, but there was no reason to leave them behind. He scooped up several money pouches and with a quick, undetectable extension charm, enlarged each interior to about 2 meters. Then, with a flick and a word of his wand, he consolidated the cavern's hoard into the pouches, filling a dozen of them before tucking those pouches into a larger pouch pocket. The dwarves were stunned. All that mountain of treasure condensed into a few small sacks. What had all their earlier hauling meant? They stood open-mouthed while Dewey, unbothered, smiled and began enlarging the dwarves' own pouches. Even Thorin, who had yet to reach for any treasure, received a spatial pouch from him. Joy returned to the company. The dwarves stuffed their hoards into their newly spacious pouches, and the youngest, Kili and Fili, stuck their arms in and gaped, then made a show of pretending their hand was severed, to the delight of their companions. "Okay, we should be moving," Dewey said at last, calling the dwarves away from their play. "Don't forget, Bilbo's still missing." The reminder sobered everyone. "Oh right, Bilbo," Balin said. "We almost left him behind." They left the treasure chamber, but the path out stopped at a sheer, bottomless chasm. No obvious way down presented itself. "It's too steep," someone said. "How do we get down?" "Jump," Dewey said coolly. "I'll break your fall with magic." Then, without hesitation, he stepped to the edge and leapt. A collective cry rose from the company as he vanished into the gloom. "Good heavens, he's going to fall to his death," Beaufort whispered. "Now listen to Duir," Gandalf laughed, and before anyone could think further, he followed, vanishing after Dewey. The remaining dwarves hesitated. "You go first, Feely," Keely prodded. "Why don't you go, Keely?" Feely shot back. Beaufort peered into the abyss and quickly retreated, clutching his chest. "No! Falling from that height would turn us into minced meat. I'm not jumping." After a moment's thought, Thorin stepped forward with a resolute look and leapt. A startled cry went up. If Thorin fell, the whole expedition would be ruined. That threw the rest into motion. One by one, they threw themselves into the void. They fell, wind whipping around them, shrieking in panic as the ground rushed up. Just as they braced for impact, Dewey's voice echoed upward. "Cushioning charm!" Their descent slowed to a halt about 8 inches above the rocky floor. For a heartbeat, they hung suspended. Then the support vanished, and they collapsed face first onto the ground. Groans and curses filled the air as they picked themselves up, dusting off and exchanging wide, shaken grins. "That was enough to stop my heart," Balin panted, pressing a hand to his chest. Gandalf stood nearby, amused. "A rare experience," he said. "Not many can say they fell from such a height and lived to tell the tale." "No thanks," Beaufort muttered. "We dwarves prefer solid ground." Beaufort glanced around, suddenly concerned. "Where's Bilbo? Wasn't his trail down there? I don't see him." "I'll check with the Palantir," Dewey said, producing the seeing stone once more. After all this time, it seemed likely Bilbo would have taken off the ring, revealing himself, if he had survived. "Didn't your Palantir already break? Are you sure it still works?" Balin asked skeptically. "It'd be quicker if we split up and searched." Dewey ignored the scoffing dwarves. He cradled the Palantir in his hand and focused until an image formed. This time Bilbo's figure finally appeared. "There, Bilbo, he's looking for a way out." The dwarves crowded around, craning to see the small shape in the stone. "Well, it looks like your Palantir's working again," someone said. Dewey nodded at the image and began to move leftward through the tunnels. "Follow me. We'll join him and get out of here." Gandalf fell in behind him, and the others followed. Guided by the seeing stone, they threaded their way through the passages until at last Bilbo was visible up ahead, peering at the rock as if searching for an exit. "Bilbo," Beaufort called loudly. Bilbo heard the voice, spun around with a surprised, relieved face, and waved. "I'm here!" The two groups met, and the dwarves greeted Bilbo with embraces and laughter. "Lucky lad, to fall like that and be unharmed," Balin said. "If Dewey hadn't told us you were all right, we'd have been sick with worry. How did you know we were here?" "Didn't you see? Dewey's Palantir. That thing finds people." Someone else chimed in. "Though it was acting up for a bit, it didn't show any trace of you at first. I wonder what happened." Bilbo went quiet, fingers slipping into his pocket as if to touch something. He glanced at Dewey and found Dewey looking back with an expression that carried its own meaning. Bilbo quickly looked away. Gandalf noticed the exchange and met Dewey's eye. Neither of them believed the stone had truly broken. Palantiri are made of hard, unyielding crystal and are not easily damaged. If the Palantir had failed to show Bilbo, it was because something about Bilbo had hidden him from its sight. Gandalf was curious, but did not press. Dewey, who had suspected as much, held his silence as well. Bilbo let out a small breath of relief, though shame and unease lingered. "Dewey, there's something I ran into," he began. Before he could finish, Gandalf's gaze snapped to a shadow across the way. "Who's there?" A bolt of searing light sprang from Dewey's hand, striking the darkness. The flare revealed a hunched, pale creature with bulging eyes, exposed for an instant before the spell struck a slab of stone beside it, shattering the rock and throwing the thing off balance. It seized the moment, glared at Dewey with a mixture of fear and hatred, shot a resentful look at Bilbo, and then scrambled away into a narrow fissure. "Gollum?" Dewey breathed. The name came out more as a question than a declaration. "That's him," Bilbo said, hushed and startled. "He said his name was Gollum. He eats the bodies of goblins sometimes. He talks to himself. I played riddles with him to buy time and found a chance to run." The dwarves exchanged confused glances. "It doesn't look like a goblin," one of them muttered. "A talking monster, then." "Shame the spell didn't finish it and it got away," another said regretfully. Gandalf waved a hand. "Forget the creature for now. We must find our way out." He turned to Dewey. "Lead on." Dewey tucked the palantir back into its leather bag and started forward. "Let's go. Get out first." With the Seeing Stone as their guide, they soon found an exit and emerged on the far side of the Misty Mountains. The dwarves whooped and clapped one another on the back. "We're out!" someone cried. Dewey took a small leather pouch from his belt and handed it to Bilbo. "I enchanted this money bag," he said. "It holds 2 cubic meters and already contains some of what we recovered in the goblin caves. There's room left. Put any extra burdens in it. It should make things easier for you." Bilbo opened the bag and peered in at the glittering coins and jewels. He was touched and astonished. "Thank you, Dewey." After a moment's hesitation, he drew Dewey aside and lowered his voice. "There's something else I found at the bottom of the cave." Dewey stopped him with a gentle shake of the head and a knowing smile. "You don't have to tell me, Bilbo, but if you want to, I'll listen." Bilbo surprised himself by deciding to speak. "I found a ring. I thought it was odd at first, but when I slipped it on, it was as if I stepped into another world. People couldn't see me. I was invisible." Dewey nodded. He had suspected as much already, but he still considered it his duty to warn the hobbit. "Bilbo, don't wear it unless you must. It has power, and it will tempt you. Hobbits have a natural resistance to its worst effects, but that does not make them immune. The ring can reach into a mind in ways that are hard to shake off." Bilbo went pale. "What do you mean?" Dewey chose his words carefully. "There was once another who owned such a thing. Gollum was not always the creature you saw. He was once like you, a small folk. The ring changed him over many years. It can twist thought and desire. That is why I warn you, don't let it live on your finger, not unless it's necessary." The revelation stunned Bilbo. He felt both incredulous and suddenly certain. The creature's size, the way it had spoken, they all bore a terrible resemblance to hobbit ways. The ring in his pocket felt suddenly hot, as if it had a will of its own. He wanted to throw it away, and yet could not bring himself to do so. Reason and obsession argued within him. At times he found himself thinking selfish, dark thoughts, jealousy, the wish to keep it to himself at all costs. The conflict frightened him. "What am I to do?" he asked, voice trembling. "Don't panic," Dewey said softly. "Be on your guard. Don't wear it more than you must. Keep your head clear and live among your friends in the light of day. In the short term, you can resist it, but the longer you keep it, well, the worse its hold may become." Relieved and chastened, Bilbo nodded. They set off again, but their respite was brief. From a rise in the land came the long, chilling cry of wolves. The group stiffened as more howls answered from beneath the slopes. "Wargs!" someone shouted. Down in the hollow, on the slopes below, a great company was gathering, armored figures astride giant wolves, moving swiftly toward them. The ground seemed to pulse with their numbers. "To arms!" Gandalf shouted. Chapter 76. A Sneak Attack. When the mountain slopes swarmed with orcs, the company felt the weight of a true army bearing down on them. Bofer the dwarf nudged Dewey, eager and loud. "Dewey, bring out your crying plant and finish them." All eyes turned to Dewey, remembering how the mandrake had devastated the goblins in the caves. Dewey glanced from the gathered wargs to his companions and shook his head. "Don't count on the mandrake to do the same here," he said. The cave was an enclosed space, out in the open, and with that distance, the whale won't carry nearly as far. Still, he produced the mandrake. He cast a soundproofing spell over everyone, pulled the humanoid plant free of its soil, and flung it toward the nearest line of charging orcs and wargs. As he had anticipated, the creatures closest to the mandrake were taken off guard. Its horrific shriek made them collapse, some unconscious, some dead. The farther off orcs and wargs skidded to a halt, startled. From his perch, the orc leader clutched his head in pain and squinted toward Dewey and the strange plant. "Fall back to where you cannot hear it," he barked in black speech. "He is a black wizard, don't listen." "But the chief ordered us to fetch the dwarves' heads," the deputy urged. "Then attack from afar. Shoot them down." Heads were all the chief wanted, it seemed. The dwarves, seeing the enemy hesitate, jeered and made rude gestures across the distance. For a moment, victory seemed likely. Then a thunder of arrows descended. Dewey slammed his staff down and raised a shimmering barrier. The hail of shafts struck it and rattled off. The cheer had hardly begun when a warning flared through Dewey's senses, an instinctive dread he could not ignore. On the distant hilltop, he saw the orc leader grin and loose an arrow directly at him. The shaft sped through the air and, impossibly, passed right through the magical shield. It struck Dewey squarely in the chest. "Dewey!" everyone cried and rushed to him. Bilbo fumbled forward, pale with worry. Gandalf was quicker. He supported Dewey, but when he saw the black arrow lodged in Dewey's breast, his face tightened. "A Morgul arrow," he said. "A Morgul arrow?" Bilbo echoed, confused. Gandalf's voice was grave. "Forged in Mordor, worked with dark spells. The head carries a poison that it tears a man's soul if it is allowed to fester." A collective fear breathed through the small company. Dewey coughed weakly. With a steadying breath, he gripped the arrow and pulled it free, ripping open his robes beneath. Beneath the outer garb gleamed chainmail of a pale, bright metal. "Mithril," Thorin's eyes widened. "From Dale, I did not think you possessed such a treasure. No wonder the arrow did not finish him." Relief swept over the group. Gandalf and the dwarves exhaled. Bilbo grinned at Dewey. Dewey stared at the black shaft in his hand, fingers tightening. Had he not been wearing that mail, acquired in Dale after his transmigration, today might have been his last. The thought left a hard, cold anger in him. He looked up to the hill where the orc leader stood, his gaze sharpened. "Keely," Dewey heard, and turned when the dwarf spoke. The mandrake stopped crying. They saw it then. The mandrake lay collapsed, exhausted and mute, its strength spent. The orcs watching noticed it too, and began to move again. Dewey buried the plant back in its pot and spoke softly. "Gandalf, take Thorin and the others and break through. Get them moving quietly." "And you?" Gandalf asked. Dewey's eyes were fixed on the hilltop. "I'm going after that leader." The sting in his chest from the arrow was small, but it burned. He would not let such an attack go unanswered. He lifted his staff and murmured the words of an old spell. Mist rolled outward, thick as river fog, swallowing several miles of the battlefield. In the gloom, Gandalf and the dwarves melted away and began to move under cover. The wargs, deprived of sight, relied on howls to locate friend from foe. Dewey consulted the Palantir for guidance and stepped into the mist. It felt as though he were walking through a land with no sound but his own heartbeat. Whenever he ran into wargs or orcs, he struck without mercy. "Shatter!" he shouted, and a force slammed through, shredding a warg and the orc beside it into tatters. Their screams were swallowed by the fog. From the hilltop, the orc leader watched his men falling, and his face went slack with fear. He ordered in black speech, "Gather together! Guard against the wizard's sneak attack!" Wargs and orcs converged to protect him. The leader glanced at the mass of his gathered forces and felt a flicker of reassurance. Perhaps the wizard could not fell so many at once. One of the wargs sniffed the air, then snarled at the position they had gathered to defend. "Shoot there! Fire!" the leader commanded. A storm of arrows flew into the mist. He even loosed another Morgul arrow, hoping to strike the wizard hidden within. Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then, from the heart of the fog, a voice floated, calm, cold. "Volley of arrows." It was not a threat so much as a declaration. Every arrow that had been loosed turned as if rebounding on an invisible shield and streaked back through the gloom. Cries erupted as hooked shafts found orcs and wargs. Bones shattered, bodies went limp, survivors were hurled aside. The orc leader clutched an unlucky subordinate and used him as a shield, narrowly avoiding the returning rain. He had a moment to breathe. Then Dewey struck again. A brilliant red flare ignited in the Palantir and then in the mist itself. Thunderous explosion. Dewey's spell detonated with ear-splitting force. The blast was blindingly bright and utterly lethal. Those closest were torn apart. Those farther away were hurled like rag dolls. The ground shuddered under the shock. The thick mist that had hidden Dewey shivered and was blown apart, dissipating into the mountain air along with countless dead and wounded. When the light faded, the hillside was a chaos of bodies, and the orc leader's confidence was shattered. Dewey stood in the clearing air, breathing hard, his chest still stinging where the Morgul arrow had struck. Around him, the battlefield had shifted. The tide, for now, had turned. Rubble and smoke lay thick at the edge of the blast. Black blood stained the stones, and the torn bodies of wargs and orcs littered the ground. Duir walked through it all, with his staff in hand, cutting down the few stragglers with casual efficiency. When he reached the leader of the raiding party, he hesitated. Something about the orc's wounds told him the man should already be dead. The orc had lost an arm and a leg, yet still stood. Duir raised an eyebrow. "You have a stubborn life," he muttered. "Not dead yet?" The orc's eyes were wide with terror, but still defiant. "Wizard, you don't know what you face. Our master commands power beyond measure. He is the Lord of Darkness. The world will bow before him, and you cannot stop him." "Your master? Sauron, hiding in Dol Guldur?" Duir replied, sneering. Before the sentence finished, a Morgul arrow streaked down from somewhere unseen. It missed Duir by inches and buried itself in the orc leader's skull. The body slumped. Duir breathed out, relieved. He did not bother with the remaining fleeing orcs and wargs. He pulled out his palantir. "Where are Gandalf and the others?" he muttered, peering into the crystal. Eyes widening, he bent closer. "What? Why is there another company of orcs? They've driven them up to the cliff." In the palantir, Gandalf and the others were trapped, pressed back against a line of sentient trees, driven toward a sheer drop. At the head of the attack rode an orc on a white warg, Duir's gaze fixed on the rider, a broken hand fitted with an iron claw, and a look of pure hatred aimed at Thorin. The wizard's expression hardened. "Azog the Defiler," Duir said under his breath. "So he's come himself." Gandalf's face in the stone went taut. He motioned frantically and shouted, "Duir, we need help!" The sound did not reach Duir, but the meaning did. He shook his head, a little helplessness crossing his features. Gandalf and the other wizards were Maya, he knew, beings of great power, but their magic was constrained. They were meant to guide the free peoples of Middle-earth, not to do everything for them. Duir had argued once with Gandalf about those limits. Gandalf's answer had been evasive but clear. The Valar's rules forbade too bold a use of power. Wizards were to guide, not to replace free will. Duir wanted to complain about those rules, about the Valar who set them, as officious as the masters from his previous life, but there was no time. He strode off toward the misty mountains as fast as he dared. By the time he neared the pass, Gandalf and the others were already forced into the trees. If Duir did not hurry, they might have to take to the air on the great eagles. On the peak, the two enemies met, Thorin and Azog, eyes blazing with mutual hatred. Thorin could scarcely believe Azog lived. Azog seethed at the image of the own arm lost to Thorin's oak shield. Thorin Oakenshield had earned his name by using an oak branch as a shield to hack off the orc's limb, and the orc had long bled for revenge. He had hunted Thorin for years and now vowed to kill him on the misty mountains. "I smell fear," Azog taunted, glancing up into the trees. "Your father smelled of it too, son of Thrain." "Leave him to me," Azog called. "Kill the rest." The wargs sprang up, biting at trunks and shaking them until the trees groaned. The orcs gave no quarter, reveling in the terror below, and kept their arrows sheathed so the wolves could do the work. The dwarves beat at the great jaws with axes and spears and shouted encouragements as they were pulled and buffeted. "Think of something." "I don't want to be wrenched out of a tree and end up in a warg's belly," one cried. "Where's Duir? When will he come?" Another begged. Bilbo clung white-knuckled to a trunk and peered down. "Gandalf, do you know when Duir will be here?" Gandalf shook his head. "I cannot say. He faces many foes of his own, and we must not come to rely on him for every danger, nor he on us." His remark was soft but firm. The old wizard's eyes caught sight of a small moth on the bark. A spark lit behind them. "If we have time, perhaps some friends can be called." He cupped the moth gently, whispered into it, then let it go. The insect flew away like a tiny white flare. At last, the orcs lost patience. The wargs pushed harder, and under their weight and teeth, the pines began to topple one by one. The company leapt from tree to tree to buy a little time until only one tree remained. It swayed so badly it threatened to break at any second. Gandalf plucked a pine cone, touched it with his staff, and sent it spinning down. It struck the forest floor and burst into a hungry flame that raced across the dead needles and fallen trunks. The fire drove the wargs back and held them at bay long enough to save the last tree. But relief was brief. The already weakened trunk, overloaded and gnawed at by wolf and claw, finally uprooted and teetered over the cliff. The company was left clinging above a yawning drop. Thorin, seeing his companions in peril, dropped to a lower bough and leaped down to face Azog once more. This time, Thorin could not repeat his old triumph. Azog overwhelmed him, driving the king to his knees and wounding him grievously. As Azog raised his weapon for the killing blow, Bilbo, in a blind panic, swung Sting with all his strength. The thin blade caught between the orc's blows and halted the final stroke. Azog flashed with rage. He struck the halfling's sword aside and snarled, "Kill him!" to his mount. A massive warg leapt to bite Bilbo. In that instant, a bright cutting spell split the beast, Defindo, and the warg tore into shreds. Bilbo stared, then looked up with a gasp of recognition. Duir! Azog's face went white with alarm as his mount disintegrated beneath the spell. He acted in a single brutal motion. He seized a nearby orc, shoved him before his face as a shield, and tried to slip away. Duir's magic answered in a silver flash. The orc before Azog was cleaved in two. The corpse fell. Black blood sprayed over Azog's face and chest. Chapter 78. The Death of Azog. Azog's eyes flitted to the sudden figure before him and froze. It was Dewey. The orc leader scanned the clearing, saw no trace of the rest of his hunting party, and felt an icy dread settle in his gut. "Looking for this?" Dewey demanded, and tossed a severed head at Azog's feet, the head of the leader of the other orc band. "I've already sent them to hell. You won't be waiting for them," Azog snarled, "or I can send you to meet them." He spat a curse and fired a Morgul arrow from his wrist, one of those wicked missiles etched with foul sorcery. Dewey did not waste words. He moved fast, a flurry of precise spells. Azog was no slouch. Orcs respected strength, and he had clawed his way to the top by killing every rival. Dodging with brutal instinct, he leaned on his ferocity and the bodies of his followers as shields, yanking a subordinate between himself and Dewey's first spells. Dewey's levitation charm snatched up a pine log and held it as a shield. The maneuver opened an escape for Azog. He hauled a riding orc from a warg beneath him, vaulted onto the beast, and drove it into a mad, scattering retreat. The other orcs and their wargs broke rank and fled in utter confusion. "Don't let Azog get away," the dwarves cried. "Don't worry," Dewey answered coolly. He watched the fleeing orc as if he had expected every twist. Azog and his mount hadn't gone far before the ground betrayed them. A swamp, new and treacherous, yawned where firm earth had been. Wargs and orcs plunged in, hooves and boots sucked under. Azog's hand clawed at mud and roots as those behind him floundered and were swallowed. But Azog would not be cowed. He stamped on a warg with his heavy boots, levered himself free, and then used the broken bodies of his followers as stepping stones. With one brutal bound, he cleared to the far side and turned to face the wizard who had ruined his hunt. "You wizard," he bellowed, "I'll remember you. You'll be my enemy forever, Azog." He unleashed a spell bright and fierce. The hilltop convulsed as an explosive force rent the earth, rocks tore free, and a landslide thundered down the cliffside. "The mountain's collapsing!" the dwarves screamed as the ledge they stood on split and crumbled. "Don't panic," Gandalf called, lifting a hand. "Our friends the eagles are here." A cry answered him, a high, clear call, and a dozen great eagles came winging out of the sky. They swept in, talons extended, lifting dwarves and riders from the tearing ledge and carrying them to safety. One of the eagles grabbed Dewey and plucked him with a swift, practiced motion, tossing him onto the back of a larger bird. The suddenness of it took his breath away, but there was no time to be surprised. The eagles were efficient. In moments they had spiraled upward, away from the collapsing slope. The cliff gave way beneath them, sending rocks, orcs, and wargs tumbling into a churning roar of stone. Dewey watched through the palantir he still held for a passing check, and frowned. Azog was not dead. During the landslide, the orc had hooked his iron-clawed stump into a fissure in the cliff face. He dangled there, buried to his waist in rubble, refusing to be crushed or to fall. Dewey felt a flash of irritation. Some villains seemed nearly immortal until the final stroke. "Brother Eagle, can you drop me?" Dewey asked quickly. The eagle answered with a sharp cry and, before Dewey could change his mind, tipped into a steep dive. The stomach-sickening plunge made Dewey's heart hammer in his throat as the wind tore past. On the cliff, Azog's chest heaved amid the ruin. He tore at dirt and jagged stone, roaring his fury at the wizard who had taken his hunters. He hardly had time to look up before the shadow of a falling eagle and the figure on its back loomed over him. Avada Kedavra, Dewey intoned without hesitation. The green flash struck Azog full. He screamed as his flesh fractured like old pottery, dark ichor pouring from the jagged cracks. Still, a last ragged breath escaped him, resistance clinging to the last moment. "You're stubborn to the end," Dewey said, voice cold. "But today is your day. Defindo." A quick final cut, and Azog's blood-red eyes went dim. He sagged, then was still. Dewey drew a long breath as silence settled over the shattered slope. He watched the corpse a moment, then turned as Gandalf and the others descended on their own eagles. The dwarves' tense faces eased into cheers when they saw the fallen orc leader. Their sworn enemy was dead. "Dewey," Gandalf said, landing beside him, "you have slain Azog, king of orcs. News of his death will spread swiftly through the orcs of Middle-earth. You have earned the title Enemy of the Orcs, and they will mark you for vengeance. Be prepared." Dewey nodded. He had expected nothing less than the hatred of all orc kind. It did not trouble him. The great birds carried the company westward over the misty mountains and only let them down at the Carrack on the Anduin. They did not fly them to the lonely mountain. The great eagles dwelt in the high ranges and watched the passes, Manwë's messengers and guardians, but they did not stray far from their patrols, nor were they meant to settle the affairs of men and dwarves. Even Gandalf, a Maya who could summon their aid, would not press them to overreach their place in the world. Dewey watched the eagles with a private smirk. It felt a little like the old tales of pilgrims forced to wander 1,000 hardships when a single leap would have taken them straight to the goal. But the law of the powers in Middle-earth was not for mocking. When at last Gandalf and the Eagle King bade farewell, Dewey's eye caught the eagle's feathered crown. An idea struck him, sudden and practical. "Gandalf," he said before the others could step away, "you've always lacked a staff corps. Perhaps one of the great eagle's feathers could serve as your staff's heart." Gandalf turned, eyebrows lifting. The eagle beside him gave a piercing cry, as if to answer. Chapter 79, The Great Bear. The great eagles and Gandalf were both under Manwë's care, so Dewey hoped their natures would be compatible. His only other option would have been something from the Balrog in Moria, a thought that chilled him. Even Gandalf, at full strength, could have only achieved mutual destruction with such a creature. Dewey had no confidence in making a staff corps from Balrog remains. He could only pray the great eagle's feathers would serve. The Eagle King understood speech. At Dewey's request, he cocked his head, plucked a single tail feather, and offered it to Gandalf. Gandalf accepted without hesitation, smiling as he stroked the bird's head. "Thank you, my friend," he said. The eagle nuzzled his hand, then spread his great wings and led the other eagles back toward the misty mountains. Gandalf watched them go, then placed the feather in Dewey's outstretched palm. "Will you take care of this, Dewey?" The feather shone with a metallic glint and thrummed with power. Dewey felt the arcane force within it and nodded. "Is it suitable?" he asked. Gandalf tested it briefly and smiled. "It answers to me. It doesn't resist my magic." Dewey exhaled with relief. Thank goodness. They didn't have to consider any more dangerous alternatives. Before they could linger, a dwarf's urgent cry cut through the air. "Gandalf! Dewey! Come quick! Thorin!" They ran to where the dwarves had gathered. Thorin lay motionless, pale and badly hurt. Gandalf knelt and examined him. His face grew grave. He readied a healing spell, but Dewey stopped him. "Let me," Dewey said, producing a glass vial. "I have Baishian elixir. It's perfect for external wounds." Gandalf's eyes brightened. "I'd almost forgotten you had potions, Dewey. That will be better than my magics for this." Balin and the other dwarves took the vial like a treasure and set to work. They were clumsy and panicked, slathering the elixir on in thick handfuls, as if more meant more healing. Dewey grimaced. The elixir was difficult to brew, and they used more than half the bottle in a single rush. But the potion was potent. Thorin's wounds knit together before their eyes, and he opened his eyes to the world again. When Thorin understood that Azog was dead, that Dewey had killed him, he was shaken. Azog had been the hand behind the deaths of Thorin's grandfather, Thror, and the misfortunes that befell his father, Thrain II. The hatred between Thorin and Azog had run deep. To learn his great enemy was gone like this took him a long moment to register. Once the reality settled, Thorin thanked Duir solemnly, and he thanked Bilbo as well. The hobbit's quick thinking had stopped Azog's blade from finding its mark. When he woke, Thorin's pride and stubbornness were tempered. The company, relieved and changed by the day's events, grew more harmonious as they prepared to move on. They left Carrick and followed the Anduin south, planning to take the Old Forest Road through Mirkwood toward the Lonely Mountain. Before long, they came upon an unusual homestead. A high hedge of thorny shrubs rose like a living wall around it. Where the hedge parted stood a tall wooden gate. Inside were wooden outbuildings, barns, stables, cattle sheds, even beehives with bell-shaped thatched roofs. A wide path led straight to the main wooden house at the center. The dwarves eyed it with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Gandalf," one asked, "is whoever lives here friend or foe?" Gandalf's face took on a guarded expression as he scanned the edges of the trees. "Neither," he said at last. "He's a solitary sort. He may be willing to help, or he may not. He could be dangerous." Before they could argue, the woods behind the hedge erupted. Bushes shredded and trees groaned as if a titanic force bore down through them. A deafening roar filled the air. Then, moving like a small mountain, a great black bear burst into view. Its paws hit the earth like thunder. The ground seemed to tremble with each stride. "My heavens!" Faces went pale. Without a second's hesitation, Gandalf shouted, "Run!" and turned for the gate. The company scattered. The bear, seeing them, gave a terrifying roar and thundered after them. They reached the house and slammed the gate to. Panting heavily, they crowded inside and pulled the heavy door shut. From within, peering through cracks, the dwarves whispered in panic, "This wooden house won't stand against that beast. What will we do?" Gandalf leaned back against a post and, for the first time since the chase began, let out a small, calm laugh. "Relax. Once we're inside, we're safe. He won't strike his own house." Bilbo frowned. "You know him?" Duir was quicker. "He must be the owner. That's why Gandalf says he won't destroy it." Gandalf smiled and nodded. "Duir's right. The bear may be hostile toward strangers, but he won't raise his own home. As long as we remain here, we will be protected." With that odd reassurance, Gandalf settled himself as if he'd come into his own sitting room. "It's late. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow," he said. They exchanged doubtful looks. A giant bear prowled the garden outside, but exhaustion from the day's ordeals won out. Duir moved about quietly and, with a touch of transfiguration, conjured firm, comfortable mattresses throughout the main room. He lay down as if sleep would arrive immediately, utterly untroubled. Seeing him so at ease, the others allowed themselves to settle on the conjured beds. Even the dwarves, still wary, drifted into much-needed sleep. As Duir relaxed on the soft mattress, a line of text shimmered into his mind. The Hogwarts Sign-in System, its notification localized. Location, Bjorn's house. "Do you wish to sign in?" A grin spread across Duir's face. He muttered the command without hesitation. "Sign in. Sign in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained Animagus Transfiguration." Animagus Transfiguration. Duir's eyes widened. The sign-in had come with a surprise.